Yes, Mr. Beer.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Jenkins.
Good morning, sir.
Before we carry on looking at bugs, errors and defects, which is where we left off yesterday, I'd like, if I may, to go back over an issue that we addressed yesterday, which is whether you saw the Bond-Pierce letter of the 18th of November 2005.
Okay.
You remember that letter from...
I remember discussing it yesterday, yes.
Yes, from Bond-Pierce to Fujitsu. It was the one that asked Fujitsu to prepare an expert report which asked Fujitsu to address in the report the issues raised by Lee Castleton in his defence, and which explained an expert's duties and the necessary inclusions in an expert report. Do you remember?
I remember discussing it yesterday, yes.
I showed you a copy of that letter yesterday. Can we have that on screen, please? FUJ 0015 2573. And if we scroll through, please. You remember the way that this pack of documents was constructed, and if we carry on scrolling and keep scrolling and keep scrolling and keep scrolling, keep scrolling, keep scrolling, and again. And we'll get in a moment. Keep going. Thank you. Just go up to the letter of the 18th of November 2005 from Bond-Pierce to Fujitsu. And I showed you a copy of this letter yesterday. Do you remember?
I remember that, yes.
Thank you. And when I asked you about the letter and if it was sent to you, you said no, you had got no recollection of that. You remember that?
That is certainly what I said yesterday.
Yes. And you said yesterday that if the letter had been sent to you, then you would have remembered it because it clearly sets out what duties there are, and you weren't aware of them until the end of 2020.
I believe I must have been mistaken in what I said yesterday in that respect.
Yes, but before we come to whether you were mistaken or not,
yeah.
I'm just going to recap what you said.
Yes, I accept that that is what I said yesterday.
So you said that you would have clearly remembered it because it set out the duties of an expert and you weren't aware of them until the end of 2020, yes?
Correct.
You said yesterday that you did not see the letter because if you had seen it, then you would have learned about the existence of an expert witness's duties.
That is what I said yesterday, yes.
You agreed yesterday that Bond-Pierce had set out in this letter very clearly and in an easy-to-understand way the duties of an expert witness.
I accept that's what I said, yes.
And lastly, you said that you were sure that the letter never made its way to you because you would, and I quote here, have done things differently, not necessarily in this case, that's the Lee Castleton case, but certainly in later cases if I'd been aware of those responsibilities. You remember saying that?
Yes.
I also asked you yesterday about your attendance at a conference with lawyers at Fujitsu's headquarters on the 6th of June 2006. Do you remember?
I do.
And you said in summary that there was no discussion about giving expert evidence or the duties of an expert at that conference.
And I have no recollection of that.
And indeed, that's reflected in the attendance note of that conference. There appears to have been no such discussion.
I agree.
Can we turn to your witness statement, please? Your third witness statement at paragraphs 251 and 252, which is page 86. Page 86. and I'm going to read those in full. 251, the inquiry's Rule 9.2 request has asked me how I first came to be involved in Mr. Castleton's case. It's also asked what I understood Stephen Dilley to be asking to provide by way of his letter dated the 18th of November 2005. And then you give that the URN that we've just looked at, okay?
Yes.
I don't believe that I had ever seen this letter until it was shown to me for the purposes of preparing this witness statement. It appears that at some point Brian Pinder emailed me and asked me to address a single question about human error, which I can now see came from the list of questions asked in the letter, and that my response to this single question seems to have been my first involvement in Mr. Castleton's case. We looked over all of that.
Yes, yeah.
252, I don't think I had any involvement until any further involvement until over 6 months later I was invited to attend a meeting with the Post Office's solicitors on the 6th of June 2006. My lawyers have shown me an email from Brian Pinder to me dated the 5th of June 2006, and you give the reference number ending in 601.
Yes.
This email attached an agenda for the next day's meeting and a scanned extract from a document, and you give a reference number 602.
Yes.
Which recorded issues Mr. Castleton had experienced with Horizon. I probably read both attachments in advance of the next day's meeting, although I don't recall doing so. Brian Pinder's email stated he was not sure how this affects ourselves, but reading the scanned document attached, his queries re Horizon, we may well require your expertise in this. Looking back at this email, I can't recall what my understanding of the process, of the purpose of the next day's meeting was, but I would probably assume that I would be asked to respond to the Horizon issues identified by Mr. Castleton. However, I don't think I knew at this stage that the Post Office intended me to become a witness in any legal proceedings. Now, you say, if we go back to 252 at the foot of the page, my lawyers have shown me an email. Can you see that in the second line into the third line?
Yes.
Dated the 5th of June, and you give that the number ending 601. So that's the day before the conference.
Yes.
If we look at that, please, FUJ 0015-2601. Look at the bottom part of the email first. 349 from Mr. Dilley to Brian Pinder and Graham Ward and others, not you at this stage. Dear Brian and Graham, I attach a suggested agenda for tomorrow's 11:30 a.m. meeting, just for discussion purposes. I also attach an extract from Mr. Castleton's Part 18 replies, setting out his allegations about Horizon. I think Marad may also add in a few issues. So that suggests that the things attached were an agenda and an extract from some Part 18 replies, okay?
And that was the assumption I made when making my witness statement.
So i.e. you read what was in this email and effectively translated it into your witness statement?
Correct.
Thank you. And then if we go up, please. That's forwarded to you. There must be a time difference because the time given is 40 minutes before the earlier email is sent.
It says UTC time,
UTC,
so that's GMT,
exactly.
not summertime.
Exactly, so that would have been 4:19.
Yeah.
Please be advised of the email below, so this is directly to you, and the attachments. Just stopping there, we can see the two attachments. One is called letter_doc, and the second attachment is an e-copy of a scanned document.pdf. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
Not sure how this affects ourselves. And then there's the sentence that you set out in your witness statement. Can you see that? So again, essentially two documents it is suggested are attached, an agenda and a scanned copy of Mr. Castleton's Part 18 replies. Now, in your witness statement, you said that the email attached an agenda and a scanned extract from a document, and you gave that the reference number 602. Can we look at that, please? FUJ 0015 2602. You'll see that these are statements of case, so legal documents. They used to be called pleadings, in which the parties exchange information about their case.
I didn't understand that at the time, but I understood that it was asking technical questions that I thought I would need to address.
Okay, and so that's not relevant to us at the moment, but in your witness statement, that's the only document that you refer to as being attached.
I agree.
And that's not relevant. Now, it's true to say that there was an agenda for that meeting for the 6th of June 2006, but it wasn't attached to this email. The reference number, we needn't turn it up, for the agenda is poll 307-1418. Now, can we please switch to the native version of the email FUJ 0015 2601, and it will be necessary to drop the YouTube feed for this. You understand this is the original version, essentially, of the email that I showed you yesterday in an imaged form.
Yes, I understand that.
So you'll see it's exactly the same email. The text is exactly the same in it. But the difference is we can see actually what the two attachments were.
Yes, I understand that.
If we look at the second attachment first, if we can just open that on the screen, we'll see that's the Part 18 replies.
Understood, yes.
Okay, so that can be closed, thank you. And then if we open the first attachment, we can see that, in fact, the first attachment of the email to you was the letter of the 18th of November 2005. Can you see that?
I can see that, and I now understand that to be the case.
Now, when you made your witness statement, you would not have been able to refer to this document, the 18th of November 2005, as being an attachment to the email, because it hadn't been disclosed by the inquiry on its e-disclosure platform in a way that associated it with the covering email. Do you understand that?
I accept that, yes.
Thank you. The association between the email and this attachment, the letter, was only realised yesterday. So I'm obviously not going to ask you why you said what you did in your witness statement about the other attachment being an agenda when it in fact wasn't.
Yeah.
Okay? Nor am I going to ask you why you didn't refer to this letter of the 18th of November 2005 in your witness statement as being provided as an attachment to the email, because you didn't have the evidence then before you to make that connection.
Correct.
Understood?
Yeah.
Can we go back, please, to the imaged version of this this letter, FUJ 0015 2573? I think it was page 8 or 9. Maybe 10. And just scroll on, please. Thank you. I'm just going to use this image version rather than that native version. The text is exactly the same. So I'm not going to ask you about why your witness statement was written in the way that it was. The plain facts are, I think you'll agree, however, that we can now see that the letter of the 18th of November 2005 was sent to you.
I understand that and I accept that, and I apologise for any mistake I made yesterday.
It was sent directly to you, and therefore I've got to ask you some questions about that, okay?
I understand that, yes.
So you accept, firstly, the simple fact that in the light of the evidence as it now stands, this Bond Pierce letter was sent directly to you?
Yes, clearly.
Do you remain of the view that you expressed yesterday that if the letter had been sent to you, you would have read all of it and not just half of it?
I would probably have skimmed through it, but clearly it hadn't stuck in my mind beyond the time that I read it, because at the time I was concentrating on the fact that I was being invited to a meeting the following day, and the substance of what I needed to look at for the following day was the other attachment, not this one. So yes, I would probably have opened it up and read it, but I have no recollection of doing that.
Why do you think your focus of attention would have been the Part 18 replies and not this letter?
Because what I was being asked to do was answer questions. If we go back to the covering email from...
Yeah, FUJ 00152601. Is it the second paragraph there you're referring
Yes.
to? Not sure how this affects ourselves, but reading the scanned attachment, his queries re-horizon, we may well require your expertise on this. Are you saying that because of that sentence, you would have focused only on the scanned document and not on the letter?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. That was the one that was actually had technical information that I felt I could contribute towards.
Why did you tell me yesterday that if you had been sent this letter, you would have read all of it and not half of it?
I probably would have read all of it, but I probably didn't read it in detail, and and obviously it didn't stick in my mind. And sorry if I misled you yesterday to suggest that it would have stuck. I think it's a problem of understanding the difference between it clearly strikes me reading it now as being important, whilst at the time it probably didn't strike me as being important. What I was being asked to do was go to a meeting to talk about technical issues with Horizon, and so I would have concentrated on the technical scan document, not the letter talking about putting together a report. And at that stage I didn't think I was being asked to put together a report, and in fact I don't believe I was ever asked to produce a report in that sort of form for this case.
Or is it that you said yesterday that if you'd received the letter, you would have read all of it and not just half of it, because it was acceptable to say that when you didn't think you'd been sent the letter?
I don't know. I would probably have read the whole thing. I'm not suggesting that I didn't read the whole thing, but
Okay.
Clearly it didn't stick in my mind.
Thank you. Can we go back to the letter, please? FUJ 00152573. But I think page 11. $12. $30. Thank you. Do you remain of the view that you expressed yesterday that the letter sets out in a detailed but easy to understand way the duties that would need to be complied with in the case of a Fujitsu employee providing evidence in at least the Lee Castleton case about the matters raised in the letter?
Yes, I have to accept that.
Do you accept now, in the light of the evidence, that you were sent a copy of this letter, that you were therefore informed in a detailed but easy to understand way the duties that would need to be complied with in the event that you provided evidence in the Lee Castleton case in answer to this letter?
Yes, but I don't believe I was actually asked to provide that sort of report in the Lee Castleton case.
Well, I'll come to that
Yeah, sure.
a little later.
But yes.
If we scan through the letter just slowly, I think you will have read it carefully overnight. The letter doesn't refer, would you accept, to the provider of a report from Fujitsu as being an expert witness.
I'm not sure that I'd spotted that in terms of, I was concentrating more on looking at what else had happened in the case rather than the actual contents of this letter.
Look at it carefully now. If we just go back to the top. Thank you. And if you just read it to yourself slowly and just indicate when you've read that which is on the screen.
Yes, I read what's on that screen.
Thank you. And if we scroll down, please.
Yes, I've read that page.
Thank you. And over the page. Thank you.
Yes, I accept that it doesn't say that the formal report is an expert's report.
No. And then and maybe you could just read the first two paragraphs under 4. And then go over the page. And then read after 14 the next 3 paragraphs.
Yes, I've read those 3 paragraphs.
And then just read under 5.
Yes, I've read that.
So the letter does not refer to the provider of the report that was being sought by the letter, by Fujitsu, at once as being an expert witness, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Instead, the letter, would you agree, works on the basis that any person providing evidence from Fujitsu about the matters mentioned in the letter needs to comply with the duties set out in the letter?
I understand that now, but I almost certainly would not have realised that at the time.
You said yesterday that you were sure that the letter never made its way to you because, quote, you would have done things differently, not necessarily in this case, the Lee Castleton case, but certainly in later cases.
If I'd understood what that was all about. Now, I clearly had no recollection that I'd received it at this point. You've now shown that I did receive it at this point, but I still have no recollection of remembering anything about that at any later stage.
But you said yesterday that had you received the letter, you would have done things differently, certainly in later cases, if you'd been aware of the responsibilities set out in this letter.
Maybe I need to qualify that to say if I'd received and understood the detail of the letter.
Well, that's not what you said.
I accept that, and I was mistaken.
Why were you mistaken? That you think that yesterday you thought had you received the letter, you would have certainly done things differently in later cases. Today you don't think, now you know you received the letter, that you would have done things differently in later cases.
I think the difference is in terms of understanding what it was all about. What I was thinking of yesterday was, with my knowledge now of the implications of what it actually says in that letter, then I would have done things differently. If I'd just skimmed through it and not made too much attention of what it actually said, and it had then gone from my mind when I was busy concentrating on the other attachment, then clearly I had not remembered anything about it much beyond those couple of days.
What were the later cases that you had in mind yesterday when you told us that if you'd seen this letter, if you'd received this letter, you would have done things differently?
If I'd understood my duties as an expert, and I accept they're laid out here, and understood at the time, then I would clearly have approached the reports that I produced for Seema Mizra's case in a different way. And as I've said before, I had no recollection of having been briefed in this way, and after all, that was about 3 or 4 years later, and I'd clearly forgotten all about having seen this letter briefly at that time.
So when you said yesterday, had you seen this letter, you would have done things differently in later cases, you had in mind Seema Mizra?
Yes, I think so. That was and clearly there were the later cases as well, but that was the next one that came along.
What about the Huey Thomas case?
I think that had happened earlier.
You'd made a witness statement earlier than earlier in the year, in March or April.
But I didn't think that was an expert report at all. That was just looking at one specific question of fact, which was what was the reason for zero value transactions. I had no concept of the fact that was an expert report in any sort of way.
I should just say, whilst it's on the screen there, just look under 5. Can you see that?
Yes.
The words expert witnesses is included. Can you see that? In performing all your duties.
Yes.
So it's not quite right what I suggested to you earlier, that expert witness or expert witnesses are not mentioned in the letter, that they are in that paragraph there. But do you still agree that reading the letter now, the requirements imposed by or suggested by Bond Pierce don't depend upon the person giving the report or making the report being classified as an expert witness?
I've not really taken that into account, so I think it's very difficult to talk about hypotheticals in that sort of way.
So you were told about these responsibilities because you've been provided with this letter. What's the explanation now then for not doing things differently in later cases?
Because I clearly not remembered about the fact that I'd seen this letter in 2006.
Your evidence in your witness statements and in your oral evidence yesterday was founded on the suggestion that you didn't need to comply with all of the duties set out at length by, for example, Professor McLachlan in his report, nor Mark Turner in his report, because they were independent experts and you were from Fujitsu.
Yes, and I stand by that.
Doesn't you receiving this letter rather undermine that point?
It could do if I'd remembered that I'd received this letter. But where I'm coming from is that I know that I acted honestly at all times, and therefore the only way that I can explain that is by the fact that I just had no recollection of this letter.
If we go to the top of the previous page, please. There, thank you. The 6 topics set out there are just asking questions about Horizon, aren't they?
Yes.
And the advice from Bon Pierce was that the person that answers them in a report needs to comply with everything that follows in the letter.
Yes, but I don't think I was being asked to produce a report at that time.
Can we look at then what happened subsequently, in fairness to you, at FUJ 301 2283? Maybe that's an errant reference. Oh, no, perfect. Can we just look at the email at the foot of the page, please? And then go up, please. You say in this email, and we're now in the beginning part of August 2006, so a couple of months after the conference at Fujitsu.
Yes.
I've had a go through this. It isn't a complete statement, and I won't have time to sort out the outstanding bits for a while. I'm happy for you to send it as it is to Stephen. Who was the Stephen you had in mind?
Stephen Dilly.
And you may decide it isn't complete enough for that. I may be able to research some areas such as auditing that I'm claiming ignorance of, if that's required. And you'll see that there's an attachment, which is a statement.
Yes.
Can we look at that statement? Same reference, but ending 84. This was the attachment to your email and was a draft witness statement. Is this right, that you compiled?
The draft witness statement was compiled by Stephen Dilly, and he'd left various questions in it. As I explain on that first page, I made various annotations, and we're back to the problem about being able to tell the difference between colours in a black and white document.
I see. So the format of the witness statement was compiled by Mr. Dilly, and some of the formal parts of it were compiled by Mr. Dilly. He included some text in it, and he asked you some questions that you were to respond to and fill in.
Correct.
And you did that in this version of it.
Yes.
And if we just scroll down, please. And look at paragraphs 1 and 2. And then if we scroll on, please. You address the Horizon system, which you'll remember is question 1 in the letter of the 18th of November 2005. What's the Horizon system? We need to explain to a judge how it works.
I don't think I would have been thinking of it in the context of that letter at the time I saw this, because this is clearly a couple of months later.
Okay. And then if we just scroll on, we can scan it. The detail's not important for the moment. If we scroll on. And keep scrolling. You can see some examples there of him asking questions and you replying.
Yes.
And then carry on.
And there's also examples of him asking questions and me saying, I don't think I'm able to reply.
Yep. And if we scroll on. And then stop there. You'll see that it was proposed that you signed off with a standard declaration. I believe the facts stated in the witness statement are true. Can you see that?
Yes.
And so this draft provided by him and further expanded by you didn't contain any of the declarations or the matters mentioned by Mr. Dilley in his letter of the 18th of November 2005 as an expert witness.
Correct.
Did you give any thought to that at the time?
No, is the simple answer. I was given this document, which was supposedly a draft of something that I should be saying, and what I did was I commented on that as to whether I could truthfully say what was in that draft or not, and corrected any factual errors that I saw within there. I gave no thought to what format it was in.
And so by that time, had the letter of the 18th of November been lost by you in your memory?
I believe so, yes.
Was there any suggestion by Mr. Dilley that you needed to comply with the duties set out in his letter of the 18th of November, or say that you had complied with the duties set out in his letter of the 18th of November for the purposes of giving this evidence?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't believe there's anything in the covering email that not sure if we went to there now. And I'm also aware of some emails which I've seen as part of the inquiry where he was saying that I was to be treated as a witness of fact and not an expert evidence. But obviously I didn't see those at the time.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Beer, can I take it, because I've only seen this as we're going along, that in fact it contains a mixture of factual content and opinion?
Very much.
So there would have been a need for all the necessary declarations?
Correct.
Yeah, fine.
It's not a witness statement of fact alone.
No.
I mean, you can see that for
That's no reflection
No,
on you,
sorry,
Mr. I'm just trying to ascertain the true legal status
understand.
of what this would be, that's all.
Yeah.
And then to round this topic off, Mr. Jenkins, you didn't in fact sign this witness statement and you weren't required to give evidence in court.
Correct, and in fact I don't believe that this version of it ever went back to Mr. Dilley, and he decided that he didn't want a statement from me at all. I think we went through yesterday the communication I had from Brian Pinder as to the fact that it was no longer required.
Thank you. Thank you, that can come down. Right, can we go back to where we were?
Okay.
Before we do, Mr. Beer, I want to say this openly, since obviously it's unfortunate that this series of documents, or these documents you've shown Mr. Jenkins this morning, had not been disclosed earlier. I want the inquiry to make a further investigation, just so that I can be satisfied about what exactly occurred. The letter of the 18th of November, as originally sent, as I understand it, attached experts' reports obtained by Mr. Castleton.
Yes.
So I would like us to bottom out whether those reports made their way in some way or another to Mr. Jenkins and or were discussed at the conference which he attended.
Thank you, sir. We can pursue that.
Yeah.
Can we go back to bugs, errors and defects, please? and turn to the calendar square bug, please.
Yep.
You addressed this at significant length in your second witness statement. It's paragraphs 53 to 82, where you recount your knowledge of the calendar square bug. Can we just look at a couple of parts of that, please? Second witness statement at page 16, please. And paragraph 54. You say, in the technical appendix to the Horizon Issues judgment, Mr. Justice Fraser grouped together a number of problems under a single heading called Calendar Square Falkirk. I understand why the court and now the inquiry has taken this approach, but it risks creating the erroneous impression that the bug was homogeneous in the sense that it was caused by the same factors and manifested itself in the same way in every branch it affected. This was not the case. As I explained below, what happened at the Calendar Square branch in Falkirk in 2005 was caused by an underlying bug in the riposte software that manifested itself when a combination of unpredictable factors, including in that particular case, steps taken by the sub-postmaster to rectify the issue, came together. In other words, there was an underlying software bug, but how it manifested itself and whether it caused harm was contingent on the presence of other circumstances. Those circumstances were not fixed. That is why the problem was hard to reproduce. And then page 28, please. And paragraph 80B, which is on the page there, you say, while many instances of the locking errors were not associated with any discrepancies in branches, e.g. they resulted in operational problems such as screen freezes, I became aware it was not just the Calendar Square branch that had suffered from discrepancies, but other branches where there were counter occurrences of the timeout waiting for lock problem. Can we start with the
Can
first?
we qualify that last thing? Because at the top of the page it says that this comment arose from the work I did in 2018,
Yes,
2019, and not at the time.
Yeah, this is later discovered information.
Yes.
In what respect was the Calendar Square bug not homogeneous?
I think it comes down to understanding exactly what people mean by the Calendar Square bug. If we're talking about the circumstances that actually occurred in Calendar Square, then that was a storm of events which came regularly at every 10 seconds for a period of time until the particular PC or server was rebooted. But there were other cases where there was a single event saying timeout waiting for lock. And what I was getting at in the first paragraph that you read to me is that as far as the civil case, they were all considered as being basically the same problem, and I didn't feel that that was a correct representation of how it should be taken.
What was the nature of the other circumstances that were required when interacting with the underlying riposte bug that produced lock errors?
The simple answer is I don't know.
And the reason why you don't know is?
It was in the Escher software, and it was their proprietary software. They, as I understand it, fixed the problem in 2006, and certainly the storm of events, which was what was seen at Calendar Square, did not reoccur as far as I'm aware.
But you didn't know then, and you don't know now, and even in 2018-19, didn't know what circumstances were required in order essentially to trigger the existence of the bug.
Correct.
Can we look, please, at poll 308-1928? And can we go down the page, please, to Miss Chambers' email? Scroll down, please. Just scroll back up, please. And again. And again. And that's obviously an erroneous reference. I'll come back to that maybe later this morning. Can we turn instead to Fujitsu 308-3712? Thank you. This is an email thread, if we scroll down, please. If we keep going. Keep going. And if we keep going. And keep going. You can see an email from you there. If we go to the end. Thank you. And then scroll up from the bottom. We can see the start of an email chain. And if we scroll up and keep going, you're not included at the moment. You come in here. And just in what context would you be sent an email like this?
I don't recognise this specific email, but I recognise the background to it as being part of the investigation we were doing for an as I believe occurred in Craig Park and one other branch, which I think is Tunbridge. As a result of that, we then did a retrospective search of NT events associated that were related to ARQ data that had been previously supplied to Post Office.
And why were you doing that?
To make sure that there weren't any problems that we'd not spotted that could cause any that there weren't problems that were occurring at the branch at the time that the ARQ data was being extracted for.
Was this a hangover, essentially, from the supposed resolution of the Calendar Square bug in 2006?
No, this was a separate issue that was, as I say, I refer to it in my witness statements as the Craig Park issue. In fact, having reread them over the last few weeks, I am now aware that actually the first occurrence of it was at a different branch called Tunbridge, but it was Craig Park that was what caused Post Office to investigate things further when I actually got involved in this in, I think it was August 2008.
I see. So if we carry on scrolling up, please. And keep scrolling. And keep scrolling. And again. And again. And then stop there. Are you essentially saying that this chain is about another kind of riposte lock issue that's separate from the Calendar Square issue in 2006?
I'm not 100% sure about that as to whether this was a storm of events or just individual events. If it's just individual events, then it was a separate issue, and it was important, as was done here, to check to see if anyone was actually logged onto the system at the time. And that was the sort of check that was being done when those events were being detected in our checking of NT events associated with ARQ data.
But I shouldn't see this, I shouldn't read this as essentially a continuation of the Calendar Square issue discovered in 2006.
Not if it's an isolated riposte lock issue, no.
How would you know whether it's an isolated riposte lock issue or a continuing manifestation of the Calendar Square?
If it's a Calendar Square issue, there would be hundreds or thousands of events occurring.
Why?
because the problem was continuing. So a lock was being, there was an attempt to get a lock, and then Riposte was continually to do the same process every 10 seconds, and it was failing every 10 seconds, and we'll carry on doing that until the Riposte service on that box was restarted.
So you said earlier that you didn't know the full circumstances that would cause...
What I don't understand is why the lock was being held all that time. The symptoms of it I do understand, in that it would be showing all these events, but why the thing was being locked and not able to process things is what I don't understand.
Was it possible that the Riposte lock problem had continued and was impacting on a branch in a way that was previously unknown to Fujitsu?
I think what we decided was the safest thing to do was to check, if we saw a Riposte lock problem, to see if anyone was actually using the terminal at the time. And if no one was using the terminal at the time, then it was deemed to be safe and nothing to worry about.
Now, we know that you were asked some questions about Calendar Square in 2010 for the purposes of the Seema Misra case, yes?
Correct.
And that you in turn asked Mrs. Chambers, Anne Chambers, for information about the problem.
Correct.
Did you make any connection with your previous involvement in Riposte lock issues such as this?
No, I think is a simple answer to that.
And why would that be?
Well, at that stage, I didn't know actually what the root cause in Calendar Square. I was just being told, please can you look into what the Calendar Square issue was. When I asked Anne for the information about it, she passed me references to a peak and I think some old emails from the time that it had occurred, and said that, if I remember rightly, that the main cause of the issue was these, what she called event storms, which was repeated events, which is separate from these isolated events that we're looking at here.
But would the, in 2010, all of the earlier Riposte lock matters, I'm going to call them, have been available to you on Pinnacle's Peaks and Kells if you had searched for relevant key terms?
Yes, I guess they were, but again, in what we were looking at in terms of what had happened in West Byfleet, we did actually extract all the NT events from 2005 to 2008, and we checked all the events, including lock issues, and I believe there were some found. I believe there's an email from Anne where she actually summarises what she had actually found there. And there were some further checks that Penny Thomas made to see whether anyone was logged on at the times that these events had occurred.
I'm just thinking more broadly at the moment, without getting into the detail of the individual cases, what you would do if you were preparing a witness statement in a case or preparing to give evidence in a case. Would you go back and look at Pinnacle's Peaks and Kells in order to conduct research about what was known about an issue, or would you, as I think you've described, just talk to or email Anne Chambers?
I would probably have asked the SSC because I wasn't particularly adept at being able to do searches on Pinnacles and Kells. I'd probably rely more on Pinnacles than Kells because I found those were more useful in terms of giving me the information I wanted.
But if you were to give evidence about a bug, your primary source of reference would have been to speak to people in SSC, is that right?
Correct.
Can we go forwards, please, to 2015, to FUJ 308 3775? And look at page 2, please. In 2015, Anne Chambers was asked to provide a description of the Calendar Square problem for the purposes, I think, of some litigation. And we can see here, she says to Pete Newsom, do you remember him?
Yes.
What function did he perform?
He was trying to think exactly what his job title was. He was a liaison between Fujitsu and Post Office at a fairly senior level.
I found a summary of the problem that Gareth produced when preparing evidence for a court case in 2010. That's a reference to the Seymour Misra case, I think.
I assume so.
Yeah. I've made a few amendments to it, to make it more generally applicable. One, the problem occurred when transferring cash or stock between stock units. Two, it manifested itself by the receiving stock unit not being able to see the transfer made by the sending stock unit and could be compounded by attempting to make a further transfer. Note that such transactions usually reappeared the next day. Three, it was clearly visible to the user as a receipts and payments mismatch at the time that one of the stock units was balanced. Four, the problem was also visible when looking at the system events associated with the branch. Five, the problem was fixed in the S90 release, which went live in March 2006. Receipts and payments mismatches normally showed up on one of the reconciliation reports and would have been investigated and reported to Post Office at the time, though of course we don't know what action they took. Does that summary by Anne Chambers match your understanding?
Yes, and I've certainly deferred to her to have a clearer understanding of the detail than I did.
You'll see in the last paragraph, after the numbered paragraph, she says that receipts and payments mismatches normally showed up. Is it the case that that's essentially a reflection that neither you nor Miss Chambers would be able categorically to state that every incident or error would be caught by the reconciliation process and directed to the Post Office to take action?
I can't remember now exactly what the reconciliation report said, so I'm afraid I'm unable to help you.
Could you tell if a problem which led to a discrepancy was referred to the Post Office, whether it was in fact actioned through the issue of a correction, a transaction correction?
That would be up to Post Office. There was an organisation called Management Support Unit, I think it was, MSU, and they raised things called BIMS reports, and I can't remember what BIMS stands for, but if a reconciliation error or something unusual was found, they would produce reports for Post Office describing what had gone on. Now, what Post Office did with those reports in terms of how they affected the branches would be something for Post Office to answer.
If we scroll up, please. And keep going. A further email from Miss Chambers, you're not copied in.
I'd retired by then.
Yeah. And you, in the third paragraph, you'll see that she says, I found a long email chain, which I've attached. And she says, having looked at these, I slightly disagree with Gareth's description of the problem below. My wording would be, 2, it manifested itself by the receiving stock unit not being able to see that the transfer made by the sending stock unit had already been accepted in and compounded by accepting it again. Other transactions might have been omitted from the balance, but would have been included in the following week's balance instead. But this is all a very long time ago, and it's hard to be entirely accurate. What do you understand her to be saying is the difference between you and her?
I'm not quite sure, actually. It would be useful to be able to see the two statements side by side. I don't know if that's possible.
I don't think...
Or maybe I can,
if we scroll down...
If I know what the URN is, I can maybe have a look at it during a break.
Well, let's look at the lower email. Keep going. And you'll see how 2 is written there. And then if we go up, how she rephrases it.
I think it's the extra has already been accepted in and compounded by accepting it again is from what I think is the change, but I can't be 100% sure.
What's the relevance of that?
That's why there's the receipts and payments mismatch, that you have to actually repeat the transfer for the problem to occur. And clearly I'd missed that out of the description that she was quoting below. But I accept that is an important difference to the issue, and in terms of describing what actually happened in the Callender Square Falkirk branch at the time.
Okay, and if we scroll up, please. Thank you, and I think that's the end of the chain. Would you agree that this was a problem, looking at it from the sub-postmaster's perspective, that they would be faced with different figures on different counters as a result of the bug?
Yes, I accept that would be a way it would show up, yes.
And that would be a situation which would rightly cause them considerable difficulties and confusion?
I accept that, yes.
This wasn't a problem that could be explained away by user error?
Correct.
Were you ever party to the explanations given by the Service Support Centre or the lines of support below them?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
Yes. Do you, in your work, did you see the kinds of things that the help desks or the SSC on occasions said directly to sub-postmasters?
Occasionally, but in general, no, because when I saw peaks and pinnacles, they were being passed on to me or the teams that I was involved in by the SSC looking for an explanation, and what was being responded back by the SSC to the help desk and also to the branches would be based on the information that had come from the developers or the designers as to what they had seen and gone on. So we wouldn't necessarily see what the comments are made.
Thank you, that can come down. What was the, was there a formalised process for providing the post office with information about bugs, errors and defects and their effects on their live estate?
I don't know. There were a number of meetings that were held between the customer services team and their equivalents in post office, but the scope of what they discussed and so on, I'm afraid I don't know. I wasn't involved in them usually.
And so you on each bug, error or defect weren't in a position to know precisely what information was provided to the post office?
Correct.
As to the existence of the bug, the extent of the problem, or the fixes proposed?
In general, there were a few cases where I was involved in the detail because I was called in to actually help explain the problem to post office, but in general, no.
Where did responsibility for that lay within Fujitsu?
There was a team called Problem Management, which was part of the customer services team, and I think those have been referred to in some of my witness statements.
Were you responsible for liaison with the problem management teams?
No, I was occasionally contacted by the problem management team or by the SSC to get involved in discussions with things, but on a regular basis, no.
Thank you. Can we turn, please, to the topic of remote access?
Okay.
Can we look at your third witness statement, please? At paragraph 473. Which is page 164. You're here dealing with your understanding of remote access at the time of Seema Misra's case, i.e. in about, I think, the autumn of October 2010. And if we read it, having set out an extract from a document you had created, you say, in this paragraph, I address Professor McLachen's hypothesis about transaction corrections, which were the most common means by which Post Office could externally impact the accounts of a branch. I noted this could only happen with the consent of the sub-postmaster or an authorised supervisor or manager. I wasn't addressing the issue of remote access as it has been considered in the group litigation and the inquiry. I understand that remote access by Fujitsu is now regarded as an issue of some significance, but at that time, remote access by Fujitsu didn't occur to me in the context of responding to Professor McLachen's hypothesis, which related to the Post Office's ability to impact branch accounts through transaction corrections. Aside from the fact I was responding to his hypothesis, I understood then that remote access by Fujitsu was an exceptional and regulated course. There was nothing in Mrs. Misra's case to suggest that a need for remote access had ever arisen, or that it could in any way explain ongoing losses in the region of £70,000. It was just not something that I had considered. So at that time, in the autumn of 2010, was it your understanding that remote access was firstly controlled?
It depends exactly what you mean. I believe that there were processes that the SSC had by which they recorded when they did carry out remote access to insert messages into the message store.
That it was recorded and auditable?
I understood that they had a process whereby it was recorded. I didn't know the details of what that process was. I believe it involved things called OCPs or OCRs, and I don't know that I ever knew the difference between them, but I've seen both phrases used, and I believe they were different mechanisms.
Was it your understanding that remote access was visible and identifiable by a sub-postmaster who could, for example, tell that there had been a remotely inserted balancing transaction?
That was my view at the time, though I've since come to realise as part of the group litigation that it wasn't always done in quite the way that I thought that it was done.
Well, that's what I want to ask you about. It was your understanding at the time in autumn 2010 that the remote access you're speaking about here was controlled, recorded, auditable and visible by the sub-postmaster?
Correct, that was my view then.
What was your understanding based on?
Informal conversations with SSE staff.
Anyone in particular?
People like John Jenkins and Anne Chambers. And I believe they've both given evidence to the inquiry about their understanding of how those processes worked and how frequently they occurred.
Was that understanding that any instances of remote access would be visible to a sub-postmaster a reason why you did not address the issue of remote access in any of your reports or witness statements as a possible cause of shortfalls?
It didn't occur to me that that was relevant. With hindsight, I realised that perhaps it was, but it was something that I didn't think of as being relevant at the time.
Did you give thought to it and dismiss it, or did you not give thought to it?
I just didn't give thought to it, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Can we turn, please, to INQ 401079? This is a transcript of Anne Chambers' evidence. There's a disclosure issue at the start of the transcript. If we turn to page 17, please. And internal, page 65, perfect. And then if we just scroll down to page 67. So if we just go back up to 65. I should read this just to put it in context. Line 5, page 68. I said, back when you gave evidence on the 3rd of May, you described an occasion when the Post Office had wanted to insert transactions without the branch being aware. I'll read back the Q&A. The question was there any method to alert others that corrective action had been taken to insert data or extra messages into a branch's account? You said the ARQ data would contain both the original transaction and the corrective transaction at the point they were done. If the full unfiltered data was retrieved and inspected, then that would show the comment, for example, certainly sometimes for counter corrections. It wasn't done consistently, but we often might use a counter number that didn't exist to make it clear that it was something out of the ordinary, or a username, including SSC, again to show that it was something out of the ordinary. That wasn't done on this specific one, and I cannot remember whether that was because I was specifically asked not to, or I was just producing a transaction that was absolutely a mirror of the one that shouldn't have been there in the first place, and all I did was change the signs of the values effectively, and I left all the other data as it was. So remembering back to what you were saying, and just to synthesize it, you were saying sometimes a fictitious counter number was used to mark out the transaction correction. And Chambers, as I recall, yes. Secondly, you were saying that that wasn't done consistently, i.e. the use of a fictitious number to mark out the fact that the SSC had made a correction. And Chambers, yes. Thirdly, you were doing that, or the SSC was doing that deliberately, i.e. using the fictitious counter number because you would want to show that an SSC member had been making the correction. And Chambers, yes. And then page 67. But fourthly, there might be occasions when you were specifically asked not to use the fictitious one. And Chambers, I don't think we were ever asked not to use the fictitious one. It was just a passage of your evidence where you said that wasn't done on this occasion, and I can't remember whether that was because I was specifically asked not to, which tended to indicate that you were saying you may have been asked not to use the fictitious number. And Chambers, I don't recall ever being asked not to do that. I can't remember which specific instance we're talking about here, sorry. Overall, does it mean that it was possible for members of the SSC to insert transactions using the branch user ID? She says, right, you're talking about user ID here now rather than counter number. But yes, it was. I mean, the message that we inserted could have contained the branch user ID. Would it follow that standard filtered ARQ data wouldn't distinguish those insertions from those that were in fact carried out in the branch? And Chambers, the standard ARQ data, yes. You might not be able to see the difference. So transactions which appeared in the standard filtered ARQ data, for example, in Mr. Castleton's case, with his ID user number next to them, would not necessarily mean that they were carried out by him. Answer, it would have been possible, yes, for SSC to put transactions that used his ID without leaving a fingerprint on the standard filtered ARQ data that had been done. Answer, yes, I think that would have been possible. Question, it shouldn't have been done, but it could have been done. Answer, yes, I don't think there's anything that would have prevented that. I don't believe that was done, but I can't say it's an impossibility. And then we moved on. When did you become aware that the SSC were able to insert transactions into branch accounts in the way Ms. Chambers describes here?
I was aware that technically they could, but my understanding was that they always injected the transactions at the correspondence server rather than the counter. In 2018, as part of the group litigation order, it was explained to me by John Simpkins, I think, that in some circumstances they actually did it directly at the counter rather than at the correspondence server, and that was different from the understanding I'd had as to how they operated up until that time.
Do you know why you hadn't been told that previously?
No is a simple answer.
You said that you'd had conversations with people in the SSC, but they hadn't revealed that to you in previous conversations.
As I understand it, and from what John Simpkins explained to me in 2018, normally they would insert transactions at the correspondence server in the way that I was expecting, but there were a few specific cases where they were doing it at the counter instead in the way that Anne's describing in this exchange. And
when did you learn about this practice of generally using an SSC ID in order to mark them out, but that not being a consistent practice.
When things were inserted at the correspondence server, I would have expected the details of the SSC user and why they were doing it to be inserted as part of that, even though it was also very obvious that it was being done at a strange counter.
But what about what Miss Chambers is describing here?
It was only when I realised that they were actually really doing things at the counter in 2018 that I was aware that that was a possibility.
In 2018,
Or something that was actually done in practice as opposed to in theory.
in 2018, did you also learn not only that they were doing it at the counter, which is what's described here, but they were doing it in a way that might attribute a change to the sub-postmaster rather than a change being made by the SSC?
If it was done at a counter and a postmaster was logged on at the time, then the way Repost worked, it would always be attributed to whoever was logged on at the time. So it all comes down to whether when they were inserting the transaction, whether they were doing it when someone was logged on or not. If there was no one logged on at the counter where they inserted it, or they were using a fictional counter, then there would be no user ID associated with it.
But if they were doing it in the hours of business when the sub-postmaster was logged on, their work might be attributed to him or her.
I accept that, yes.
And when did you come to learn of that?
As I say, I always knew it was theoretically possible, but it wasn't until 2018 I realised that SSC on some occasions actually
We're
did
actually
that.
doing it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think I cover that more in my fourth witness statement.
You do. So that might be an appropriate moment for the morning break.
Yeah, by all means. What time should we resume?
So if we can just have a longer break and do one break,
Yeah.
if that's possible. So maybe 20 minutes until 22.
Fine.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Can we look, please, at INQ 401058? This is a transcript of the evidence of Richard Roll. Can we look at page 21, please? And then internal pagination, page 81, which is the top left, from line 11 onwards, which I think is a question by me. I say, can we go back to your witness statement to page 6 and look at C? Quote, we could go directly through the communication service to the post office gateway and then the counter. If the postmaster wasn't logged in, then there would be no ID attached to the database entries, which sometimes cause the batch processing to fail overnight. If the postmaster was logged on, then any changes we made would have their ID attached. So as far as the system and any auditing was concerned, the sub-postmaster would have been responsible for the transactions. Mr. Roll, that's what I was trying to say. I think that's what I was trying to say in the post office transcript we just looked at. Thank you. Was this a method that you use frequently? Him. We were all pretty adept at it, yes. Whether you were adept at it, he said, fairly frequently, yes. Fairly frequently, yes. Why did you use that method? Him. It was the only way to rebuild the counters, to get the data off the counters. Question, the footprint that was left would have been the sub-postmaster's footprint and not yours? Yes. Was there any visibility that you or somebody else in the SSC had done this, as opposed to the sub-postmaster themselves having done it? Answer, sometimes yes, sometimes no. What would distinguish? We would, sometimes it would be recorded. I'm a bit rusty on this now, I'm afraid, but sometimes we told the postmaster we were going to do it. While we were doing this, the postmaster couldn't use the counter. It was very important that nobody used it. At other times, especially if maybe the postmaster, I'm just thinking, I'm just trying to remember something else. If the postmaster had gone to lunch, for example, we could have gone in and done things without him knowing. Just stopping there. I think you accept now that the SSC staff could not only effectively hijack branch user IDs in this way, to insert transactions into branch accounts, but did so?
Yes, I accept that now. In fact, it was as a result of seeing Mr. Roll's witness statement for the group litigation that I then inquired further of the SSC to understand more as to exactly how they'd done the injections.
Did they tell you for how long they had been doing it?
It was something that was always possible within Legacy Horizon. What I was told was that it wasn't done very frequently, but I don't think that figure was quantified. I believe John Simpkins may have actually tried to quantify it at some stage, but I can't remember the details.
What about the duration of it rather than the frequency? Was it throughout the use of Legacy Horizon, i.e. from about 2000 to 2010?
It was certainly possible throughout that period, yes.
Did they tell you anything as to whether it had been done throughout that period?
I can't remember whether I asked that question or not.
That, as I've described it, hijacking a branch user ID to insert a transaction into a branch account, would that make the entries in the standard filtered ARQ data impossible to distinguish from the transactions that were in fact entered by the sub-postmaster in the branch?
In the standard ARQ data, yes. If it was done on a real counter. There was, again, as Anne Chambers was saying, they often did it using false counters.
Yes.
And then it would be obvious that it wasn't done on a real counter.
When did you discover that this could be done, was being done, and therefore, when it was done, the entries in the standard ARQ data were impossible to distinguish from transactions in fact carried out by the sub-postmaster in branch?
As I say, I always knew it could be done, but I didn't realise it was being done until 2018.
Okay, so you always realised that it could be done?
Yes.
Right from year 2000?
Yes.
And how did you know that it could be done?
Because I knew what functionality Riposte provided and the sort of interfaces it provided to allow it to be done.
But nobody had told you from that time onwards that they were in fact doing it?
Correct.
You discovered that in 2018-19?
That is my belief, yes.
So you knew that the SSC had the facility to tamper with branch accounts?
I don't think I'd call it tampering, but yes, I understand what you're saying.
Well, it would be tampering, wouldn't it? I know that carries pejorative.
Well, that's why
overtones,
I didn't like the term. I believe that the SSC would have been using that facility responsibly and doing it when they needed to correct errors that had occurred in the branches.
The standard filtered ARQ data used in court proceedings wouldn't be able to distinguish between those occasions when a transaction had been made by the sub-postmaster and when it had been made by the SSC?
Not if it had been done at the counter.
And therefore the standard ARQ data used in court proceedings couldn't of itself prove that the branch accounts had not been, in my words, tampered with?
I accept that now, but I hadn't thought of it that way at the time.
When you prepared your witness statements, both the case-specific witness statements and the generic witness statements, you didn't mention the facility that the SSC had to undertake this function, did you?
No, because I didn't think it was relevant. Again, with hindsight, I realised that perhaps I should have done, but at the time, it was. My understanding was, and still is, that it was a very rare thing for the SSC to actually do.
Did you not realise that whether the SSC told you that it was being done rarely wasn't the real issue? It was the extent to which there was a tamper-proof evidential chain being presented to a court?
I'd not thought it through in that way at the time, I'm afraid.
Can I turn to your own knowledge of remote access by turning up WITN 0042 0100? This is Ian Henderson's witness statement. Do you remember him from Second Side?
Yes.
And can we turn to page 13, please? And look at paragraph 43 at the bottom. He says, in September 2012, I met with Gareth Jenkins, the lead engineer for Post Office Horizon, at the head office of Fujitsu in Bracknell. He told me that, over the page, approximately 10 members of staff from Post Office were permanently based in Bracknell, dealing with various issues, including bugs, errors and defects. 44, Gareth Jenkins told me that Fujitsu routinely used remote access to branch terminals for various purposes. This was often without the knowledge or specific consent of individual sub-postmasters. He told me that members of his team could connect remotely to branch terminals and generate keystrokes that were indistinguishable from a sub-postmaster accessing the terminal directly. They did this for various purposes, including collecting log files directly from branch terminals. Is what Mr. Henderson says there accurate?
I don't think so. I don't think that was how I would have explained things. I mean, particularly the last bit about collecting log files directly, that's nothing to do with changing transactions into the accounts.
Do you agree that in September 2012 you met Ian Henderson?
Yes, I agree.
Do you agree that that was at the head office in Bracknell?
Yes.
Did you tell him that members of staff from Post Office were based in Bracknell permanently, dealing with issues including bugs, errors and defects?
I was referring to some of the testers, not people. Those Post Office staff members did not have access to the live system.
You weren't in your conversation referring to the SSE then?
No. Not in terms of paragraph 43.
Did you tell him that Fujitsu routinely used remote access to branch terminals for various purposes?
I probably said that the SSE had access to the branches for pulling back things like diagnostic logs and things like that. And I may well have suggested that it was possible for SSE members to inject correcting transactions, but I would have seen that as being done through the correspondence server at the time. But when I spelt that out in detail at the time, I just can't recollect the details of the conversations.
Did you tell him that such remote access was often without the knowledge or specific consent of individual sub-postmasters?
Well, if it's referring to actually pulling back log files, there would be no need for the knowledge or consent of the sub-postmasters.
Did you tell him that members of your team could connect remotely to branch terminals and generate keystrokes that were indistinguishable from a sub-postmaster accessing the terminal directly?
I don't think that I would have said those because the only people who had that sort of access were the SSC and they weren't part of my team.
Did you tell him that anyone in Fujitsu could connect remotely to branch terminals and generate keystrokes that were indistinguishable from a sub-postmaster accessing the terminal directly?
They wouldn't be generating keystrokes, so any injection of data wasn't done by generating keystrokes.
Did you tell him that Fujitsu staff could connect remotely to branch terminals and alter branch accounts in a way that made it indistinguishable from the sub-postmaster doing so?
I don't think I would have said that because my understanding was it was actually done at the correspondence server at the time.
In general terms, you say that you wouldn't have said this because you didn't know it at that time. You only discovered this in 2018, 2019.
That's my understanding, yes.
What he's attributing to you in September 2012, never mind the precise details, but generally speaking, is accurate, isn't it?
There was remote access, yes, but not
Yes.
in terms of the gory details of it.
Well, not only that there was remote access, there was remote access of a kind which made it indistinguishable from the sub-postmaster's activities.
Well, I'm not sure that would be the case, because what I was thinking of is remote access to the correspondence server, which would be distinguishable.
He was, it seems, told that there was a form of remote access that made what had happened indistinguishable from the sub-postmaster carrying out the relevant functions. That you say that you didn't know at the time, but what was happening, but you subsequently found to be true in 2018, 2019.
Again, I knew it was possible, but I didn't know that it was being regularly done.
What was the context of your conversation with him in September 2012? Why were you talking about remote access at all?
I can't remember. My recollection was that we had a meeting where I was talking to him about how he could actually interpret and analyse the logs.
Do you think you would have spoken about remote access in that connection, i.e. what the logs did or didn't show?
I can't remember, I'm afraid.
Can we go back in time a little to 2002 by looking at FUJ 308 8036? Can you see that this is a Fujitsu document, a design document, version 1 of which is dated the 2nd of August 2002?
I can see that, yes.
And it's described as secure system support outline design.
Yes,
You're neither an originator nor a contributor.
correct.
You'll see the abstract. It describes the requirements and outline design for secure excuse me, operational support access to counters and servers. And then if we scroll down, please. Look at the approval authorities on that page and then over the page. And scroll down. You're not included in any of those.
Correct.
Is this a document you would have seen at the time?
Probably not.
And just if you can tell us in general terms, why not?
It wasn't an area that I was particularly involved in.
Because it's about the functions of the SSC, is that right?
It was to do with some tooling that was being provided for the SSC, is what I understand from it from reading it now.
Can we look, please, at page 15? And look at 4.3.2. This is describing the position in 2002. Support access to the Horizon system is from physically secure areas. You would know that to be the case. The SSE was, as you've told us, in a
Yes.
physically secure area. Individuals involved in support processes undergo more frequent security vetting checks. Did you know that?
I wasn't aware of that, but I'm not surprised that they were.
Other than the above controls, other than the above, comma, controls are vested in manual procedures requiring managerial sign-off, controlling access to post office counters where update of data is required. Otherwise, the third line support has 1, unrestricted and unaudited privileged access system admin to all systems, including post office counter PCs. Did you know that was the position in 2002?
I can't remember. I wasn't involved in the details.
Did you ever come to learn that they, in the SSC, had unrestricted and unaudited privileged access to all systems, including counters?
I know that later on it was audited. I didn't realise that this was something that had not been introduced at day one.
When did you find out that it was controlled in some way or audited in some way?
Well, What this outline design is to do with the mechanisms that were introduced to give that control, what I didn't realise was that hadn't been there from the very beginning until I saw this document as part of my preparation for the inquiry.
Okay, so it wasn't until 2021
Or even later,
even later,
yeah.
that you realised that the SSE had unrestricted and unaudited privileged access to counters?
As far as I can remember, yes.
It says, secondly, third-line support has the ability to distribute diagnostic information outside the secure environment. This information can include personal data, etc. The document continues, the current support practices were developed on a needs-must basis. Third-line support diagnosticians had no alternative other than to adopt the approach taken, given the need to support the deployed horizon. There are no automatic controls in place to audit and restrict user access. This exposes Fujitsu to the following risks: the opportunity for financial fraud, operational risk, errors as a result of manual actions, causing loss of service to outlets, infringement of the Data Protection Act. When you were giving evidence about the operation of Horizon in your witness statements, is this the kind of information that you ought to have known about?
With hindsight, probably yes.
When you wrote your witness statements and when you gave evidence in the Seema Misra case, did you make any efforts to find out about issues such as this?
My understanding was that at that time things were all being audited and there were processes in place, but I didn't understand the details of the processes and what auditing was taking place.
When did you gain an understanding that everything was being audited and processes were taking place?
I can't remember is the simple answer.
Can we look, please, at FUJ 308-9535? If we just look at the date of this by scrolling down over the page, there, the foot of the page, 24th, just at the top, 24th of August 2016. Do you see that?
Yes.
If we go back up to the first page. Remote support secure access server high-level design. Is this speaking about a similar thing than as in the previous document we looked at?
I don't know. I don't recognise that. I see that what looks like my name is there, but that is the other Gareth Jenkins working on Post Office because I had retired at that point. I
was about to ask you if we scroll down, please. The HDCR solution owner, that's not you?
No, I'd retired by that time. And I was aware that there was another Gareth Jenkins working on the account, which did cause some confusion.
And so you didn't see this document at the time?
No.
And so the references that I would find in it back to the 2002 document that we looked at, it's a reference document and there are some extracts from it cited in the body, you wouldn't have seen at the time in 2016?
No.
Thank you. Can we turn, please, that can come down to poll 309-7217. And if we scroll down, please. If we go to the foot of the page, at the foot of the document. And scroll up. And keep going, it's just so we get that first email. Thank you. An email from you to Rachel Panter, from Rachel Panter to you, of the 26th of November 2012, copied to others, asking for an expert report. This is in the case of Kim Wiley, yes?
Yes.
She says, "Dear Gareth, request for an urgent expert report. Further to my previous email, I'm writing as a matter of urgency to request a signed and dated copy of your report in the case of Kim Wiley. I've attached a copy of defence solicitor's request for further disclosure. I've attached some documents, all of which sets out the background to the case. Can you consider this and include this paragraph at the beginning of your report? Quote, I've been asked to provide a statement in the case of Kim Wiley. I understand that the integrity of the system has been questioned, and I can say the following. As there have been no specific criticisms of Horizon raised by the defence, your previous report can be used with the addition of the opening line referred to above. Please see the defence case statement, which contains the nature of the defendant's case. And if we scroll up, please, to see your reply. I've been advised that I can try to help you, you say, if it isn't too late. I've had a read through the info you sent me yesterday. I've also taken my previous witness statement, which I produced in early October, and amended it. You're there referring, I think, to your generic witness statement of the 5th of October 2012.
Correct.
And we're going to come to that generic witness statement later. Reading through the defence statement, I see it does make some specific points which my statement doesn't currently address, specifically the challenges regarding robustness and remote access to the system. Do you want me to try and address these specifics? And then scroll down. And then some admin. Then if we go up, she replies, thank you. If you feel you're able to deal with the issues of robustness and the remote access system fairly swiftly, then I'd like you to address these points that have been raised so we can deal with every area they've criticised. And then scroll up. You say, what I propose is adding the following. I've been asked to provide a statement in the case of Kim Wiley. And just stopping there, this is going to be a bolt-on to your generic statement of the 5th of October.
Correct.
I understand the integrity of the Horizon system has been questioned, and this report provides some general information regarding the integrity of Horizon. And then if we skip a paragraph and look at, I also note a comment has been made about it being possible to remotely access the system. It is true that such access is possible. However, in an analysis of data audited by the system, it is possible to identify any data that has not been put, sorry, I'll read that again. Possible to identify any data that has not been input directly by staff in the branch. Any such change to data is very rare and would be authorised by the Post Office. As I've not had an opportunity to examine data related to this branch, I cannot categorically say this has not happened in this case, but would suggest this is highly unlikely. Dealing with that proposed insertion into the Kim Wiley statement, which I'm not going to deal with it now, you in fact entered into the Kim Wiley statement.
Yes.
You say it's true that remote access to the system is possible.
Yes.
You say that in an analysis of data audited by the system, it's possible to identify any data that has not been input directly by staff in the branch. That's not accurate, is it?
It was as I understood things at the time, but it isn't in my understanding of things now. Well, sorry, when I say that, if the SSC had been following their processes, then it would be, even if they'd been doing it at the branch, it should have been visible in the raw data, but not in the ARQ extracts.
What data you were referring to there? You say, however, in an analysis of data audited by the system.
Whatever data was there. So when I was looking at data, I tended to have the raw data as well as the ARQ data, and I appreciate, and I say here, that I had not had the opportunity to examine any data from the branch.
On what basis did you understand here in 2012 that any change to data was very rare?
from informal conversations that I'd had with the SSC, as I've mentioned earlier.
So the people...
I'm not saying I'd had a conversation as part of this, but just from what I'd picked up over the years.
So informal chats?
Yes.
Where did you get the understanding that any such change would be authorised by the Post Office?
I thought that was part of the process. As I understood it, then any changes, when they inserted data, then there would be a mechanism whereby Post Office would sign it off. And I believe that both Anne Chambers and John Simpkins indicated that as part of their testimony.
You knew when you were making this addition to the statement, though, that there was a form of remote access that could occur that would not be shown in the data.
I knew that it was theoretically possible. I didn't think it was something that was routinely done.
Why didn't you say so?
Because I didn't think of it. I was assuming that things were done in the normal way at that time.
Did you think that that was the right basis to approach statements made to criminal cause on the basis of assumptions of propriety?
I realise now that that is the wrong basis for doing it, but that is what I felt at the time.
You do say you cannot categorically say this hasn't happened in the case, but suggest it was highly unlikely. On what basis were you saying it was highly unlikely?
Because I knew that, I understood that that inserting transactions by the SSC was a very rare thing, and I believe that that has been established as well.
Can we turn on to poll 309 8724? This is an email to you from Simon Baker of June 2013, so the following year. And if we just scroll down, he cites from your an email that you had sent, where he says the key message in your response is as follows, quote, "The Post Office Bracknell team had no access to the live system, therefore could not conduct any of these transactions." Is that something that you told him?
Yes, I think so. The Post Office did not have access to the live system, yes.
And then well, hold on. The Post Office Bracknell team
did not have access to the live system. They only had access to test systems.
If you said that, would you be referring to Post Office personnel?
Yes, that's what I meant by POL. I would have said POA if I was referring to the Fujitsu team.
And then he continues, the previously supplied emails suggest that the Bracknell team could access, possibly on an overnight basis, transactions in the live system. Please see the following extracts. Although it's rarely done, it's possible to journal from branch accounts. There are possible P&BA concerns about how this would be perceived and how disputes would be resolved. And then scroll down, please. And over the page. At the moment, your response is inconsistent with what is being said in emails sent between Bracknell team members. Can you look into this urgently and address this apparent inconsistency in an updated response? So you're being asked essentially to comment on questions from Second Sight about staff at Bracknell having access to the live system.
Yes.
And did you reply to this?
I can't remember. I may well have done.
If we scroll to the top, yes. I'm not sure that I found a reply. Did you have a conversation with Mr. Baker about it?
I can't remember. This was part of what I think was SR05, one of the spot reviews, and there were various emails about things, but this particular bit of it was talking about the post office team, and it was very clear to me from the context that it was referring to the post office team in the basement. I noticed there's a reference to journaling, and I think that is referring to what post office could do in their back-end systems in Chesterfield, which would have no impact on the actual branch account.
I see. So the context of this exchange, or these requests, is post office staff at Bracknell rather than Fujitsu staff.
That is how I understand it from looking through this now. I can't remember the details of the specific email off the top of my head, but it is one that I recognise as having looked at as part of my preparation for the inquiry.
Thank you. Moving on, can we turn to FUJ 3008 7100? And if we scroll down, please. A little further. Thank you. Sorry, just scroll up to catch it. Thank you. We can see an email from Michael Harvey to you and James Davidson. And he says, with respect to inserted data, could you provide a little more detail as to the audit trail that addition of data leaves? So notwithstanding we haven't used it, if we were to use, would the sub-postmaster or post office be able to see it in the audit record? I assume that this is the case, and so can we make it explicit? We need to be cognizant of the point that these two individuals are attempting to make. They're trying to say that Fujitsu have changed data, and so in answers, post office explicit questions, the underlying answer must be, one, when we have and why, i.e. the 2010 incident, and two, if we had, the following audit trail would be left demonstrating we'd done it. No audit trail means we could not have changed the data. Scroll up, please. Your reply. The answer is slightly different depending on whether we're talking about old Horizon 2010 or earlier, or new Horizon online 2010 onwards. However, in both cases, the injected transactions would be visible in any local reports the postmaster may view, and also in the audit extract. I think you now realise that to be wrong, don't you?
Yes, I do.
On what basis were you saying it?
Because my understanding was that whenever the SSC were injecting transactions, they did so at the correspondent server and not at the counter.
Was that based on informal conversations as well?
I can't remember on what basis it was. It was probably informal conversations, and also the fact that it's actually a lot easier to inject transactions at the correspondent server than at the counter in terms of their processes.
The context in which you were being asked this, I think James Davidson was the lawyer, wasn't he?
No, James Davidson was, at that stage, I think he was, he had been employed by Fujitsu as the head of the customer services.
Okay.
He'd then left and gone freelance and was primarily involved in liaison for second sight between Fujitsu and Post Office. Michael Harvey was a lawyer.
Thank you. You were being asked by a lawyer for quite precise information, if we go back to his email.
Yes. And that was my belief at the time, and I accept now that I'd misunderstood things.
Well, it wasn't misunderstood. What inquiries had you made in order to provide the answer that you did?
At the time, none. I was relying on what I thought I knew.
And is that your reflective of a general approach when involved in threatened or possible court proceedings or court proceedings themselves? You work on the basis of what you had understood from conversations and what you thought you knew rather than properly researching an issue?
Yes, I guess that has to be the case.
If we scroll back up to your reply. Yeah, sorry, we're there. you say in both cases the audit extract would show, perhaps not obviously and in different ways, depending on the version of Horizon, that these transactions have been inserted in the data center and not taken place on a normal counter. That's not correct in relation to standard ARQ data, is it?
It would be in the standard ARQ data because one of the bits of information in the standard ARQ data is the node ID or the counter position, and anything injected to the data center would have a node ID that reflected it was being done at the data center.
You say our processes should ensure that Post Office has signed off on any occasion when such data was inserted. What inquiries did you make as to the nature of the processes?
At the time, none, but my understanding had been that there were standard processes, which I didn't know the details of, that the SSC followed, which involved getting things signed off by Post Office.
Again, you say that's based on your understanding. Was that just through general chat?
Probably, yes.
Can we move forward then to the Horizon Issues judgment, please? RLIT 605. And page 87, please. And pick up at para 316. That's Mr. Godseth, had given information in his first witness statement, namely in Legacy Horizon, any transactions injected by the SSC would have used the computer server address as the counter position, which would be a number greater than 32. So it would be clear that a transaction had been injected in this way by someone other than the sub-postmaster. This is important because it would be consistent with the case originally advanced by the Post Office, that any such injections would be entirely visible as having been done externally, i.e. not within the branch, due to the counter number used, 317. However, this important information was simply incorrect and was corrected by both Mr. Godseth and Mr. Parker in subsequent statements before they were called. And as a direct result of Mr. Roll's evidence, the information that was incorrect and therefore had to be corrected had come directly from Mr. Jenkins. This shows that Mr. Jenkins did, in at least one very important respect, give Mr. Godseth directly incorrect information about the visibility of injected transactions, which not only could have an effect on branch accounts, and whether this would show, or rather not show, that the impact on those accounts had come from the injections made outside the branch. Mr. Godseth only found out the true position when Mr. Parker was preparing his subsequent witness statement in the weeks prior to the commencement of the Horizon Issues trial, in other words, in 2019. He'd not known that before. His explanation...
I don't think that is quite an accurate representation of what actually happened in the...
Let me just get to the end of the paragraph. He had known that before. His explanation was as follows. And then he sets out an explanation. Firstly, is it right that you told Mr. Godseth that any transactions injected by the SSC would have used the computer server address at the counter position using a number greater than 32?
That was my understanding when I was having a conversation with him. I can't remember the exact month now. I think it was probably August or September in 2018, something like that, when he was preparing his first statement.
And why were you having that conversation with him?
To explain my understanding of remote access at that time.
Why were you having to explain to him your understanding of remote access?
I think I was commenting on a witness statement that he was putting together for the GLO.
And so is this right? As a result of informal chat, you told Mr. Godseth something that turned out not to be true. He included it in a witness statement in the High Court.
I realised my mistake soon after he'd actually put his witness statement in, and I then attempted to correct my mistake shortly after that. And I sent I produced a document about 2 or 3 weeks after his final draft of his first witness statement, pointing out that I'd realised that that was actually incorrect. And I sent that to the various lawyers and to Torsten and also probably to Steve Parker.
Did your change in approach come about because of you reading Richard Roll's witness statement?
Yes, and as a result of that, I had a conversation with John Simpkins, which pointed out the error in my previous understanding.
We've seen, sorry, that can come down. We've seen Mr. Henderson say that you said to him in 2012 that Fujitsu could remotely access branch terminals and insert transactions which would be indistinguishable for those in the branch.
We've seen him say that, yes.
You subsequently claimed otherwise in your emails that we've looked at.
Yes.
And it appears when you gave your initial account to Mr. Godseth for the purposes of him writing a witness statement, you maintained that position.
Yes, it was a genuine mistake.
So is it the case that it turns out that what Mr. Henderson says that you admitted to him in 2012 was in fact, in general terms, true all along?
I don't believe that I would have said that at the time, but I just can't remember the conversations that we had. It was my genuine belief that injections of transactions were done at the correspondence server rather than at the counter.
Thank you. Can we turn to a new topic, please? The use and reliability of ARQ data. You deal at various points in your third witness statement with ARQ data. Can we turn those up, please? Paragraph 127, which is on page 41. Uh, 127. You say the evidence before the inquiry has shown that issues sometimes arose in respect of the audit data. You deal with the issues in greater detail below. However, there is a distinction I think it's important to be clear about at the outset. This is the distinction that exists between A, data which actually gets committed to the audit server, which becomes, excuse me, the audit data, and B, data being affected by a problem before it's committed to the audit server, which at that stage is not audit data. And then paragraph 128, you say the issues which have been considered by the inquiry do not change my mind that the audit data, including the raw audit trail and the NT events log, was a highly reliable and effective means of diagnosing system issues. I'd still agree with Mr. Justice Fraser's judgment that the audit data, once the true scope of that term is understood, was a gold standard for this purpose. The relevance of audit data not including information generated by Pol, SAP or Credence is not clear to me, since neither system was used by sub-postmasters in balancing their accounts. Some general questions to start with then, please. Did you, in general terms, consider that the ARQ data that you were provided with in each case that you were asked to provide a witness statement was sufficient to enable you to reach conclusions about whether a particular branch had or had not experienced issues with Horizon?
It's not just the ARQ data, it's looking at the associated NT event logs that come with it.
Yes. So ARQ data plus NT event logs?
Yes.
Did you consider that both species of data were sufficient for you to reach reliable conclusions about whether a particular branch had or had not experienced issues with Horizon?
I was looking, right. I think with the use of the NT events, then yes, the ARQ data would be reflecting what had actually been recorded at the branch, and if there was a problem in recording it, then that would have been visible in the NT events. So yes.
So is the answer to my question yes then?
Yes, I think so, yes.
Has your view about the adequacy of such data in any way changed in the light of any of the evidence given to the inquiry by any of the Fujitsu witnesses?
I believe that it is also useful to be able to look at the raw NT event logs as well, and I usually had access to those raw event logs.
Did you look at them?
Yes. Well, at least when I was given evidence. I mean, there was clearly some cases in 2012 where it was decided that there was no need to look at the ARQ data at all.
In some cases, in your witness statement, I think you made clear that you hadn't seen the ARQ data and therefore couldn't comment on the cause of the shortfall.
Correct.
In other cases in which you provided a witness statement, you didn't explicitly point that out.
That is correct. I was expecting that if there was some specifics to be looked at, then I would be shown the ARQ data, but clearly that didn't happen.
In those other cases in which you provided a witness statement but didn't state that you were unable to comment on the cause of the shortfalls without having seen the ARQ data and NT events logs, should we take it nonetheless that you felt able to offer definitive views on the causes of shortfalls without having seen such data?
I think I was giving a general view of how I thought how the system should be operating. I was expecting to have some sort of comeback in terms of specifics if that was appropriate, and clearly in some of those cases it didn't happen.
Who were you expecting to give some sort of comeback?
The post office investigators.
Why did you make it clear in some witness statements, for example the Grant Allen one, that you were unable to offer a view as to the cause of specific shortfalls in that case without having seen the ARQ data, but not in others?
Because I'd actually been given some specific information there as to something that might be the cause, and I was agreeing that that could be a cause, and that was something that I would have needed to investigate.
Did it ever occur to you to refuse to provide a view unless and until you were provided with all of the data that you considered necessary in order to answer the questions which you have been asked to address?
Well, taking that specific case of Grant Allen, I was certainly concerned about that, and not only did I check with the lawyers from Post Office that it was okay to sign that statement, I also checked it with a lawyer within Fujitsu that it was okay to sign that statement before I did so.
Did you assume that those at the Post Office responsible for pursuing the criminal cases, i.e. either investigating or prosecuting them, who were asking you to provide reports and witness statements, were aware of the fact that you didn't automatically have access to ARQ data and NT events logs in every case?
I'd understood that it was the normal thing to actually have ARQ data. It wasn't until later that I realised that they didn't always provide it. I thought that was the whole purpose of ARQ data, was to have some sort of information to support any sort of prosecution or investigation.
Dealing with the distinction that you make in paragraph 127, if we just scroll up, between data which is committed to the audit server and that which isn't.
Yes.
If data is affected by a problem before it's committed to the audit server, would that mean that there is a risk that once the data is committed to the server, it's unreliable?
If taken into account with the NT events, then that would make it clear that that has actually happened. So as long as you look at the NT events as well as the ARQ data, then I felt it would be reliable.
I don't think you addressed that point in any of your reports or witness statements or any of your advices or explanations to the Post Office.
I was expecting to be asked to look at the audit data, which therefore would have been doing the checks against the NT event data. But so, I accept that that didn't happen.
So again, the reason for not mentioning is that you were expecting somebody to come back to you about it.
Correct.
when you were looking at audit data which had been committed to the server, how could you be confident that that data hadn't been affected by a problem before it got to the server?
Because I know I was aware that the process for generating the ARQ data would include checking for unexpected NT events at the same time, which should therefore have detected any such failure.
Can we look, please, at poll 309 7480? And go to page 3, please. And scroll down. This is a quite complicated email chain between you and Helen Rose about the lepton report and the logs produced as a result. If you can try and help us distinguish or understand what's being said to start with. You refer to some files and you say they are part of the standard ARQ returned.
Yes.
And then in the third paragraph, you say if that, which is what you described in paragraph 2, is sufficient for your purposes, then you do have all you need in the standard ARQ. However, what I was able to confirm from my look at live data a couple of weeks ago, and is also held in the underlying raw logs, is confirmation that the reversal was generated by the system and not manually by the user. What might also be available in underlying logs is whether or not the system was rebooted. I suspect it was, but have no evidence one way or the other. I can confirm the other user did log on again. Do you need anything further from me? So to summarize, you were explaining here the limitations of what was included in standard ARQ data. Is that right?
Yes.
You were explaining some additional data that you were able to find by looking at what you call live data.
Yes.
Which in fact revealed that the relevant transaction was one not undertaken by the sub-postmaster, but was one generated wrongly by Horizon itself.
No, it wasn't generated wrongly by Horizon itself. It was one that was generated by Horizon itself as part of the recovery process following a failure of the system, and the whole purpose of that reversal being undertaken by the system was to reflect what the postmaster would have understood to have occurred at the time of the failure.
I see. So it was an automated process where the system generated the reversal
to reflect what should have been understood by the sub-postmaster in the branch at that particular time.
Okay. Then if we scroll up, please. We see Helen Rose replies, I can see where this transaction is now and understand the reason behind it. My main concern is that we use the basic ARQ logs for evidence in court. And if we don't know what extra reports to ask for, then in some circumstances, we would not be giving a true picture. That's right, isn't it? That if they were using in court cases the basic ARQ logs, in some cases, a true picture would not be given to the court.
I would dispute that because, in fact, that reversal was part of providing the true picture. The reason that reversal had actually taken place was to reflect what the sub-postmaster would have seen in the branch at the time.
Well, hold on. If we go up to your... Well, hold on. We should read the second paragraph first. I know you're aware of all the Horizon integrity issues. I want to ensure that the ARQ logs are used and understood fully by our operational staff, that we have to work with this data both in interviews and in court. What did you understand her to mean by saying to you that you were aware of all of the Horizon integrity issues?
I'd been sent a few months earlier a report that she had produced of branches that were challenging the integrity of Horizon. So I assumed that she was referring to that report of hers, which I'd been sent a copy of.
So not meaning you're aware of all of the integrity issues with Horizon that in fact exist, but instead meaning all of the allegations made by sub-postmasters about Horizon integrity issues.
That is how I would have understood that statement to have been made.
She says, I want to ensure that the ARQ logs are used and understood by operational staff who have to use them in interviews and in court. We go back up to your reply, please. You say you understand your concerns. It would be relatively simple to add an extra column into the existing ARQ report spreadsheet that would make it clear whether the reversal basket was generated by recovery or not. This would address your concern. So was it the case that the existing ARQ data being relied on by investigators and prosecutors did not give a full picture? You were suggesting a solution to that.
It was giving a full picture of what had occurred. There were some... These system recoveries were purely to actually put the branch accounts back into the state that they should have been in following a failure. It's a fairly complicated scenario to try and describe. I don't know if you want me to get into the technicalities, I suspect not, but it was all to do with what can happen when a comms failure occurs at the wrong time.
You don't say in reply, hold on, Helen or Miss Rose, you're wrong. The data you have does present a full picture. You say there needs to be a change in order for it to do so. What
I was saying is that if she wanted to be aware of those things specifically, then that could be added into the ARQ, into the standard ARQ extract.
Was that done?
I don't believe,
to your knowledge?
Not as far as I'm aware.
And why wasn't it done to your knowledge?
Because it required the Post Office to request a change on Fujitsu to do that, and I don't believe they pursued it.
So it was a Post Office decision?
Yes.
Do you know why the Post Office did not pursue it?
No.
Thank you. Can we move on, please, to your integrity reports?
Yep.
Thank you. That can come down. Just looking at it generally to start with, you authored 2 reports addressing the integrity of data on Horizon.
I think they were narrower than that in terms of what their scope was. But I know the reports you're referring to.
The first, excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. It's hay fever.
Well, take your time, Mr. Beer.
You authored 2 reports. The first, 2nd of October 2009, do you remember?
I remember that report, yes.
The title of that was Horizon Data Integrity.
Yes.
That was about legacy Horizon.
Correct.
Would you prefer an early lunch? It's 1:45.
That's most generous, sir.
Right. What time shall we resume?
Can we say 1:25 to 2, please?
Yeah, fine.
Thank you.